Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 7 of our 10 days of 2021 season reviews, talking about each team in reverse championship order. And today it's McLaren. Get to talk about my beloved McLaren and their 2021 season. 275 points they managed with a win and 4 podiums added on top of that. They only had 2 retirements overall, which is pretty good. I think if you're a team that wants to start fighting at the front, it's a good idea to not retire. So it was a good showing overall. Very, very positive. But I can't help but be a tiny bit disappointed that they couldn't repeat their 3rd place from last year. But I think ultimately the news of the season overall is good. They finished with nearly 70 points more than in 2020, bagged double the number of podiums, and of course finally got that race win. And of course it's the only 1-2 result for any team this year. So it's a pretty good year to hang their hat on, I think. They also had the best livery of the year with their golf livery. I think the standard livery was okay. I don't mind the current livery, like it's all right. I don't think it's quite the blockbuster of historic McLaren liveries, but I did really like that golf livery. I thought that was very striking. So that's my favourite of the year, such as it is. So there's Shane, there's a lot of understandable excitement around them this year because they had a bit of a double whammy, didn't they? They moved to Mercedes engines, which in itself was a bit of McLaren Mercedes, it's happening again. And,
here we are.
And of course, they've had these 2 drivers, one of whom has this proven track record of results, Daniel Ricciardo, proven race winner. In the past, one of the most exciting drivers, and then became this very respected racer with the sort of famed dive bomb lunge overtaking style. And then, of course, Lando Norris, this big up-and-coming star of the future, who every season just seems to have gotten better and better. And this season really has been the apex of his results overall. But it did feel like a season overall of 2 halves with McLaren, because they came charging out of the gate with a fantastic set of results before the summer break. Obviously, bad luck in Hungary with both cars being victims of the open chaos, notwithstanding. Even if Ricciardo never quite seemed comfortable enough with the MCL 35M to keep up with Norris, but their biggest moment kind of came in Italy. There weren't really that many other major dramatics for McLaren, other than Lando obviously losing out with his first win in Russia. After the sort of second half of the season, it kind of died off a little bit after they had established themselves. Just looking at the other results here, Ricciardo kind of pulled together some more comfortable performances at the American and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. But by that point, something had kind of stalled in the car's competitiveness. I think perhaps they weren't really doing much development in the later half of the season, focusing more on 2022 perhaps. So by mid-season, they'd scored 163 points. But in the second half, they scored 112 points, and 43 of those came at one race in Monza. And after that win, Ricciardo had just 3 points finishes in 8 races. So it really was in 2 halves the season for McLaren. What did you make of the Papaya squad's 2021 campaign?
It started off incredible, didn't it? Like, let's just be honest. The McLaren came charging out of the gates, like you've already mentioned. It's hard to actually top or hard to add anything to what you've already talking about, because you went through a lot of stuff, and that was all my notes. You've basically summarised. But
I've been
McLaren
sneaking a look at your notes, clearly. Maybe I can see the reflection in your glasses.
I just stopped wearing them. McLaren came charging out of the gates, and it was such a positive start to the season. Lando held on to P3 in the Drivers' Championship for a couple of races where Bottas was not doing as good and where Perez wasn't doing as good as well. So that was like, hold on a second, McLaren are here. McLaren Mercedes are here. Lando's P3 in the drivers. All we need now is Daniel to pick up a little bit, and this team will be unstoppable. But like you mentioned, up until the midway point of the season, everything before that, so the start of the season was fantastic. Lando was on point. I don't think you can criticise Lando very much this year. He's made a couple of mistakes, but that might be more team-related or strategy-related more than driver mistakes. Daniel, on the other hand, slow start to the season. Really, we kept on saying it just a couple more races, didn't we? I remember going back through the post-race discussions. We were like, couple more races and Daniel will start to feel more comfortable. Couple more races and Daniel will start to feel more comfortable. And that slowly start to creep in. There were some good results. I think it's just a different driving philosophy, of a completely different team, different engine as well, going from Renault to the Mercedes engine. So he's not driven a Mercedes engine before. So lots to learn over a busy season. It was a tale of two halves. That doesn't mean I feel like they've had a bad season at all. I know they've dropped down from 3rd place to 4th place in the constructors. They have scored more points though. Ferrari in 2020 really messed up the standings, finishing in P6 when they did, because everything was kind of out of position. And now Ferrari are back on where we kind of expect them to be. Everything's a little bit more, back into position. So McLaren in P4, they probably could have scraped P3 with better results. I feel like that's more on Daniel than it is on Lando. But on the whole, such positivity. This was always an adaptation year, because this is the first year they've had that Mercedes engine in the back of their car. They've had to adapt the car ever so slightly. They started tweaking it at the end of 2020, looking at different aero philosophies to try and get that engine in and that working. And obviously, it started off really well, but it just slipped away towards the end of the season, where other teams, maybe with more financial backing and more resources, just kept on plucking away at the 2021 season and managed to just pip out McLaren. I'm just very excited about this team. Despite the fact they finished in 4th, I think they've had a fantastic season. I think Daniel Ricciardo's got better as the season's gone on. His driving's got better as the season's gone on. His points doesn't necessarily reflect that, but I feel like he's got more comfortable with the car. But as a whole, a great season and so much positivity and so much to look forward to in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think they deserve credit for bringing in that new engine and not really having any issues. Generally speaking, when teams have to deal with new engines, there's a certain transition period. But like you say, they tried to get some of that in before the homologation period or whatever it is at the end of last season. And they didn't really have any, it wasn't like they had engine issues or they were dealing with any teething problems. They seemed to integrate it quite nicely and they were off straight away. And as we said, the majority of their really strong results came at the beginning of the season. Let's take a look at the drivers in focus then. I think let's start with Ricciardo. He ended up with 115 points, and obviously he grabbed the team's win, their first win since 2012. So it was, that was obviously a big part of the excitement. And a big part of the excitement for the team overall was just his arrival in general, because he's one of the most popular and skilled drivers on the grid. But I have to say that some of that excitement has evaporated a little bit for me, because although it's not without its highlights, including the highlight of 2021 for the team, I think Daniel's got a bit more work to do to back up the hype surrounding him, because his Saturday performances especially really put him at a disadvantage. Norris failed to reach Q3 just once, and that was at Zandvoort, whereas Ricciardo was knocked out in Q1 twice and Q2 7 times. So that was really where he put himself at a disadvantage going into the race. And then the other issue was that he was struggling to get to grips with the car just when it was at its most competitive, and Lando was putting it on the podium. And then as he was getting more comfortable with it, it became harder and harder just to keep it in the points, because it became less competitive overall. So it was unfortunate in that sense that he took that time to get better with the car, which, eventually, I think you're right, he did generally improve in his consistency, but by that time, obviously, it was getting more difficult to be competitive. I also think he was very lucky not to get a penalty for ruining Bottas's race in Mexico. To me, that seemed like a fairly slam dunk penalty that he just went into the back of him going into turn 1, and that, Bottas was pole, so that kind of ruined Bottas's whole race, really. So I think he was lucky to get away with that. But despite all that, I don't want to rag on Ricciardo too hard. It's all out of love, I promise. Even without his win, there were some good results. British Grand Prix, P4 in Russia, P5s in Austin and Jeddah. It did take him a season to find his feet at Renault as well, where he was very, very consistent in his second season. It's just that he's the first person to big himself up, right? He has this sort of almost an endearing arrogance.
Absolutely,
He's quite charming, isn't he? So he's quite happy to sort of to big himself up. And when he was at Red Bull, there was no arguing with it, right? Because when he was at Red Bull, he was immense. But now that's quite a long time ago. That's going back quite a few years now. And he's got a rising star as his teammate who this year at least clearly had the better of him. So I think Ricciardo's great. I think he still has a lot of potential. He really should be a lot closer to Lando though, and I think that I can't remember if I said at any point during the season that I'd be prepared to give him a whole year to find his feet. And I think, eventually it became clear that would have to be the case. But like you said, we were going through a lot of the earlier races going, a couple of races and he'll be up there. And he sort of did. But then, like I say, by that point, it was almost a bit too late.
I think Italy was a massive turning point for the team because it was a 1-2, which was incredible. The only team to achieve that this year, and that says a lot on itself. The fact that you've got Mercedes and Red Bull, who are miles ahead of the competition, and yet they haven't scored a 1-2 this year, which I find absolutely fascinating. But it looked like it took Ricciardo 12, 13 or 14 races to get to Italy to finally put that car where he wants to be putting it and driving it the way he wants to drive it. And his reaction after the race as well, I think it was like, I never left, or not I'm back, but I never left. And it was like, right, he's still so hungry for this. Of course he is. But there's still that persona around him that he is the last of the late breakers. He is incredible overtaking into, lunging into corners. And he just hasn't been able to prove it this year. But when he did prove it this year, it all came out. All that relief came out, which I thought was interesting, but nice to see. And then the car just stopped developing. I feel like that car just probably didn't get worse. It just didn't get any better throughout the season, which where other cars did. And then Ricciardo felt a bit more comfortable. But then the car's natural performance just didn't let him to score maybe the points he wanted to. Like you've already mentioned, there was that cliff. And as soon as Ricciardo got comfortable, the car kind of dropped out of its competitiveness, which is a shame. But also it makes 2022 really exciting because like you mentioned, it took a year to get used to the Renault. And then he got wins with the Renault and podiums with the Renault. Lando, I can't remember how Lando got into McLaren or what his first couple of seasons were like. But I'm fairly sure they were, he's got better as time's gone on, of course. But next year will be the big old, is Daniel Ricciardo the driver we remember and want him to be in that McLaren Mercedes? Or was it, I don't want to say was it just the Red Bull, because the Red Bull's a phenomenal car and it was always great on its brakes, but that's where Ricciardo built his reputation. And I would love nothing more than for Ricciardo to bin that reputation off and be incredible, but at McLaren.
Yeah, it's hopefully going to be a chance for him to prove himself with the new regs. And now, because that car has obviously not been developed with both of those drivers in mind. Lando's been there a lot longer and has probably helped develop that car a lot more, especially as we've already talked about how they developed it going into this season from last year. It is the MCL35M. It's not a whole new car, and that was true for a lot of teams. So now they're developing a whole new car. Maybe there's a little bit more of Ricciardo in mind. In the way that it's developed. So yeah, I think hopefully we'll get to see that coming into 2022. Let's look at Lando then. Lando Norris, 160 points. And although he didn't get his win, he didn't have to leave that up to his teammate. He did get 4 podiums. Now you mentioned, Lando's career thus far. And when he started in 2019, there was clearly a lot of potential there because he was putting it in the top 10 pretty regularly. He had a really strong season overall. And then in 2020, obviously the team was still trying to build themselves up, but he did put it on the podium that first race. Never forget scenario 7.
Yeah.
And although he didn't quite manage to repeat that, he was still very, very strong. He had lots of P4s and P5s, etc. This really did feel like a breakthrough season for Lando. Especially in the first half, where he got those 9 top 5 finishes in 10 races, including 3 podiums. He just absolutely smashed it from the start. He played the team game well as well at Italy, of course, with the 1-2. Some fabulous defending to hold off Hamilton in the sprint and then Bottas in the race. So he really was the ultimate rear gunner there, even if he probably would have preferred the roles to be the other way around. He obviously nearly grabbed his first win in Sochi. It wasn't to be, but he did have a brilliant pole lap. Should have pitted, mate. I was yelling it at the screen. I was there at those last laps going, just pit, just do it. Even if you're a bit slower, you'll end up, with some half-decent points. Just do it. But he also did well to complete 10 consecutive points finishes from Zandvoort to the end in a car that was obviously struggling more and more to compete with its midfield rivals. His qualifying results were really impressive as well. Regular forays into the top 4, especially his P2 and P4 in the 2 Austrian races. It's obviously a track that the car and he are particularly good around. Obviously got pole at Sochi. He was P3 in Abu Dhabi. I mean, that's when the car was struggling. And this guy put it, P3 on the second row there. So for me, personally, only Hamilton and Verstappen were better this season in terms of overall quality and consistency. He had the measure over Ricciardo in both race and qualifying results. And other than binning it in qualifying in Belgium, which was particularly irritating because he was the fastest. He was the fastest in Q1 and Q2. And Q3, I was like, yeah, here we go. And he binned it. So, yeah, it happens. Maybe he was a little bit too sure of himself in Sochi to stay out. Maybe should have trusted the team questioning whether or not they should pit. But it's pretty hard to find faults with his performance across the season. So for me, other than the 2 championship rivals, he's the only other driver that could really match up. Third best driver of the season, if you like.
Yeah, I'm not a struggle to add anything to what you've already said, apart from we've got a lot of world champions. We've got a lot of world champions on the grid. One less now, but one less because Kim is gone, but one more because Max is here. But every world champion has made huge mistakes, and that's how they learn. If Lando not boxing, when it was slightly drizzling on one lap and then pouring down on the second lap and, boxing a lap too late or 2 laps too late, I think it might have been 3 laps too late. But if he wasn't, if he decided to stay out and think he could do it, that's a lesson he'll have to live with. But it's certainly a lesson well learned, and he'll apply that to future races. And I think binning it in Belgium, he was miles above everyone else's performance. He was incredible in Q1 and in Q2. The weather just got a little bit worse, and a couple of drivers were calling for it to be red flag. Sebastian Vettel himself said that this session is too wet now. A Rouge is it's a blind uphill corner where you just have no idea what the traction's gonna be like until you're either keeping it on the tarmac or you're going 190 miles an hour into a tire wall. And thankfully he was okay, but just goes to show what a performance. And can't fault the guy at all. Like, yes, Russia was a little bit disappointing. Would have loved for him to win at Russia, and even more, I would have loved for him to win at Monza as well. But he played the team game. He knew where the points were at. What a season. His first half of the season, like you said, first 10 races in the top 5 positions, top 5 finish in 9 of them. That's ridiculous. Like, that is incredible. And this is where we were drawing those comparisons to Ricciardo. And then, Ricciardo never really picked it up until later on in the season where both cars were struggling. But even with both cars struggling, Lando still scored points, like, in the second half of the season. Quite a lot of points as well. They weren't high, as in they weren't, P3s, P4, P5s. They were P9s, P10s, and P8s. But points regardless. Incredible year for Lando. His personal best. Really excited to see what he does in the next year. Just super excited to see where he goes with this.
Yeah, if he can pull off what he did this season and just keep building on top of it, he really feels like a champion in waiting. And if McLaren can provide the car, then I think that he's absolutely got the goods to make it happen. Speaking of which, what do we expect out of them next year? New regs, new opportunities. Can McLaren capitalise?
I really hope so, and that goes without saying. I'm sure your answer is I really hope they do. McLaren aren't afraid to change philosophies, to change design ideas, to implement new ideas. They went from Renault to Honda, and that was going to be this groundbreaking change in engine. And look what it did to the team. It absolutely crippled them for years. And I was a little bit scared that this year they were going to have a Mercedes engine, and I fully expected them to have some reliability issues going forward this year, but they didn't. Like you said, 2 DNFs for the whole season for both drivers combined is probably one of the best finishing results of the year. I'll have to find that statistic out, but that's only 2 DNFs over 44 races with 2 drivers. That's pretty incredible. So they've already implemented that brand new Mercedes engine. So the reliability's there, and they've just got to pick an aero philosophy to go with and stick with it, and hopefully it works. And I am excited. It's hard not to get excited because it's a British team, and I love the drivers. I think it's a real strong pairing. And after the fight they've had this year, Ferrari, I would love to see them fight Ferrari and maybe Red Bull, Mercedes next year. It would be really good to see. I think we're in for a treat. I really do.
Yeah, it was Mercedes they went to they went from Mercedes to Honda.
Yeah, did they go from Mercedes to Honda?
And then they went to Renault. Because it was they were
and then back to Mercedes.
They were McLaren Mercedes up until it must have been 2014.
Yeah, of course they were.
And in 2015 they went to Honda, and then they went to Renault, and then
what a terrible time to go to Honda when Mercedes become the most overpowered engine on the grid.
Yeah. Well, they've come a long way since their
it's amazing
2015 it was their sort of 2015 to 2017 slump, wasn't it? And I got to say, it really feels like it's time to leave the midfield behind.
Yes.
It all hangs on whether or not they can obviously nail these new regulations, and we don't have a crystal ball. We can't see what's going to happen, but Norris and hopefully Ricciardo as well, they're two outstanding prospects for next year. I think I said at the start of the season that on paper they were the most exciting driver combination going into the season. Obviously didn't quite turn out that way, but I feel that way again going into the next season.
I stand by it. Yeah.
I think that, like I said, some of the shine has gone off for Ricciardo for me, but there's no denying his potential. What he did at Red Bull was outstanding. This was a guy who went toe-to-toe with Max Verstappen, who is now world champion. So I think that on paper, it's still super exciting. They have the quality and now the experience, including Lando as well, who goes into his 4th season in Formula One. So it feels now that they've got the quality and the experience to really make it happen. And if they can get that car, and it's time for McLaren to leave the midfield behind and become the championship winning team that they have been in the past, fingers crossed that they can make it happen. But like you say, very, very exciting team. Very, very different to what they were in the past as well. They've kind of really shaken off the very different image and style that they had during the Ron Dennis years. And I liked those years. They had their own certain charm to them, but it was definitely time to leave all that behind and become a very different team. I was thinking, they posted on Twitter, they had some video they did recently where they were like blindfolded decorating a Christmas tree. I don't know if you saw this. It was like Norris and Ricciardo.
I haven't, no.
And I think the top comment on the video was like, I can hear Ron Dennis cringing looking at this, which is true, is a very not Ron Dennis thing to do. But that just shows how much the team has changed, and they're leaning on their sort of papaya roots a little bit more. And I think it's for the better. So fingers crossed for McLaren.
And that was McLaren for the 2021 season. A huge season for the team. You can tell Alex and I are both excited for what has been an amazing year for the team, and also what is going to be hopefully an amazing 2022. And if you've got any thoughts or opinions or questions, then you can contact us at RacePerMinute on Twitter, or you can get in touch with us at raceperminute.com. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment and we will do our best to get back to you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or a like wherever you get your podcast from. And please subscribe to wherever you get your podcast from, because it really helps us keep there's this weird algorithm, which we're not quite sure how it works. We try to figure it out and nobody knows. But by liking and subscribing, you're showing us that you appreciate the comments, the content we're putting out. And it just drives us to keep on making this podcast, which I quite like doing it. It's really enjoyable. And if you really want to support the show, you can do by donating as little as £1 a month at patreon.com/RacePerMinute, where you can receive some lovely rewards as well. So Alex, that's the bottom 7 teams done. Now we're moving into a different realm, the top 3. Ferrari's next.
I don't think I like McLaren being referred to as a bottom 7 team.
They are still a considerable amount of points behind. Well, they ended up quite a fair few points behind Ferrari, unfortunately. Next year is going to be different, but Ferrari managed to pull it out of the bag on the last couple of races, and that's why they're in P3. But we're moving on to the top 3 teams. I'm excited. Hopefully you guys will stick around and listen to the top 3 reviews, because we're looking forward to it.
See you then.
See you then.